Right. And so, like, if the Earth is speeding up, then by implication, the moon must be coming closer, and that may be because the Earth's magnetic field is weakening. I don't know, and if the moon's motion is related, as I said, to the core and core stability and the magnetic field,
it must be.
Then if the magnetic field collapses, does that mean that the moon is going to drift in? I mean, it seems like a possibility to me that could be the mechanism that allows the moon to drift in, and that happening at a rapid rate would cause massive tsunamis, and it would likely shift the crust, right? For example, the idea that the Mayans were here as refugees, and if the idea is that if because here's the thing, I think that cyclical micronovas are part of every star system, right? And so if that's the case,
it must be,
right? And so if that's the case, no civilization survives as a space age civilization except by being away from its home during its supernovas. And so that's a whole level of like, that's where you get into like space age people and extra dimensional travel are all evil or demons or aliens, and it makes sense that like, and then you try to like think about the timeline of that stuff versus like our Earth, and the possibilities are just endless,
So I saw your email. I took some notes. I don't know if they will be useful or not.
Okay.
I learned about the Lorentz equations that you always talk about.
Sure.
I knew them as the butterfly effect and chaos. I didn't know that they were called. It was from the Lorentz equations.
Right. Yeah, I didn't really know any of that stuff until I started digging into it, and that was really the end of my journey. And that I figured all that stuff out at the beginning of the summer, and that pretty much melted my brain. I go out so far on a limb sometimes putting things together, and it's an intuitive process. It's a creative process where I'm pulling apart accepted science and playing with possibilities. And
yours are quite far out.
Yeah. And so when I start building on assumptions that I make and then other assumptions and trying to like put it all together, it's a little overwhelming. And I'm not a math person. I used to love math, but I didn't like go through calculus or physics in school. I actually went to school for theater and then for religious studies. So I skipped all of that. And so when I came back this past summer and I was figuring all that out, the possibility that it was real, when I have these kind of crazy conclusions, I have to step back because I'm a very skeptical person, actually. And so I spent the whole summer kind of being a little depressed that I figured out the whole nature of reality and there was like nothing left for me to figure out. Not that there is always more to figure out, but this seems to be the key to really tying it a new cosmology together. It's obviously the Lorentz equations aren't my work and the Mandelbrot isn't my work. I'm building off the work of other people, trying to understand it as a layman and put it together where there's questions about other theories that don't make sense. So
I think that what makes your theories possible is that you go and collect information from all these important people in science. Let's say it that way. And the problem to me with science is that the multidisciplinary science does not exist beyond it only exists beyond the official narrative. And so when someone like you grabs all that data and starts connecting dots, it's more than obvious that we're going to find some absolute truth that the fellow that has only one equation on his hands cannot figure out. That's why I like Nassim Haramein, for instance, because like Velikovsky, he grabs the mythology, he grabs that and connects it to what science has to say about those things, and things starts to make sense in a way that science cannot get there, because they don't use neither mythology, they don't use spirituality, they only use numbers, and numbers cannot tell you everything without being interpreted, and science does not interpret numbers, they just calculate them and get some result, and this is it, okay, we got it, this is it. So
yeah,
that's why I have faith in your system.
This is the problem between the way I see it. Science right now is focused on breaking down things into parts, and that's from point A to point B. That's where they want to go, and that's very linear thinking. And so we're trying to get back to cyclical thinking and a cyclical view of time and the nature of the cosmos and how everything is interrelated, because when you're putting it in a linear conception and just looking at the part, you don't see the whole. And you might get some wisdom about that phenomenon at that time, but you're not seeing the bigger picture. And that's what's really coming into view with what I've been doing, and with what Randall, I just watched his, he just released another video today or yesterday about the Great Year. And that's really what drove a lot of this question is what drives the Great Year, and how does precession play into it, and how does the moon play into that? So,
and how did the ancients know about it?
Right. And how did they know about it?
Yeah, if now we don't have the means to calculate it, because we start measuring these things relatively in a few years only. So how did they manage to calculate things that are, I don't want to say something that is not true. Let me, I have my, I think it's 40,000 years, right?
For what?
For the complete cycle. It's
the Great Year
26,000
yeah.
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of generations.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what the way that I'm looking at it now is that Ben Davidson with Suspicious Observers, do you follow him? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
So he's gathered the evidence that there's an event every 12,000 years, every half cycle. And I concur with what he says for the most part. I've tried to get his attention about the moon and talk to him. He lives in the same state. I've met him a couple times, but he's really focused on the sun. And so the cycle itself, what appears to me, it demonstrates how it's all interconnected, obviously. But I think that the major event happens more in the age of Cancer and Leo. And like, I think I've heard you say that you don't think that this is the big one either. Ben doesn't really think that this is the big event that wipes out civilization either. But regardless, a solar flare can wipe out civilization quite easily. It doesn't even have to be a micronova. But what I've kind of concluded is that the effect of the moon depends on where it is when such an event happens. If there's a micronova, the effect of the moon being between the Earth and sun is very different than it being behind the Earth in its magnetotail, or on the sides of it. And it depends on, it's affected by the incoming shock wave of the solar flare. Where is the moon in its orbit? Is it coming straight into that to the point where it stops the moon? Is it coming behind the moon and pushing it more in its orbit? Is it coming directly here where it's unprotected by the magnetosphere and being blasted off pieces that then hit the Earth. And behind the tail is it keeping the whiplash of the magnetotail as it gets blown off and pushed away. So which one of those situations is most likely to cause a pole shift? And I don't think that it's this one. I think that it's either the one in Leo or the one in 4,000 years or 6,000 years.
When you say pole shift, do you mean geological or magnetic?
I mean the crustal displacement. If there is one,
the geological, yes.
The geological.
Yes, I don't believe it either. Yes.
No.
Because the magnetic is on the way. So
the magnetic field changing is happening now. Yes. And I think that flip. So I think that there's a polarity between now where we are in the cycle and the opposite end. And so we're in the most auspicious time right now. That's why the sign for Aquarius is a human. And as we move back towards Leo, things will get more chaotic. So like they say we're entering the Kali Yuga, but we're still in the golden age of the Kali Yuga. And so at the transition between the next ages, Capricorn, and then so on, there's going to be events where the sun will affect us more as we get towards Leo. And believe it or not, I found that information out in a astrological chart from the 1500s. And it's one of those strange, crazy things. And I researched the guy who had put it out, and he did seem to have some kind of connection to occult circles. He was a Dutch guy. And that's where like a lot of the Jews were in the Middle Ages in the 1500s. And so there did seem to be some connection there to occult knowledge and wisdom. And it's a very interesting image because it contains a lot of very interesting encoded messages about astrological events, I think. And in each age, there's certain parts that are painted red, which seem to indicate how much catastrophe there is. And then there's other, there's obviously the Great Dragon, and there's some very interesting alignments, but it seems to indicate to me that the way that the cycle works is that everything gets wiped out in Leo, starts over in Cancer. We basically crawl out of the mud. In Gemini, we start becoming human again. There's a pair, and we start populating. Then we go through Taurus, and we're warlike. We start herding again, and we come to Aries, I think, and more war. Then Pisces, and then Aquarius is where we really civilization has expanded again to a point where there's enough people and potential to really advance. And then we go through a tumultuous 12,000 years to get to the next one, but it's not, all bad. There's obviously life goes on and things change and evolve, but it's very clear that it becomes more of we go to space, and that's part of our civilization goes off to space.
Yes.
And then the major event that wipes out Earth happens again in Leo. And and I think
we are the ones that are left behind. Is that it?
We are either the ones that are left behind, or we're descended from the ones who came back.
Okay.
And I think that cycle continues and has been going on for a long time, and that a lot of the aliens are actually from Earth, and these are different generations from the past.
I also agree with that. Not all.
Not all of them. Not all of them.
I don't like absolutisms in any form. But one of the things that you were talking about the moon, and you were the one who called my attention to the part that the moon has to play in all this. And I went to see, and I already studied astronomy for 2 or 3 years, but I didn't remember the exact numbers. So the moon changes its distance 50,000 kilometers. It's in miles.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a perfect sphere. It goes
Yeah.
from 400,000 kilometers to 350,000 kilometers.
So 50,000 kilometers is a lot of kilometers. Okay, but the changes we see on Earth are massive, but are not destructive. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if the sun gives a micronova or some sort of solar flare, and the moon is in the way, let us say, it's right to take it in full force, as people, scientists like to say that the Earth is there, the moon is there to protect the planet from impacts. I really don't think so, because it's so chaotic where the moon is going to be that it just doesn't explain it. But
well, I actually think that the moon is what creates the magnetic field.
How so?
Well, if you look at which planets don't have a magnetic field, they're the ones
they don't have moons.
They don't have moons, and Mars has a similar core to ours, but very small moons and a very small magnetic field.
So they say.
So they say, yeah. So I think that it's part of, the system that I'm articulating in terms of how the Lorentz equations tie it all together, basically reduces gravity and electromagnetism to a factor of heat and density. And so in that sense, like if something's doesn't have the flow, it doesn't move, and if there isn't flow, then
you're saying that the moon is the engine that places the dino to swirl. Is that it?
Yeah, I am actually, and they don't really know what causes it. There isn't a good.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
And I think that it makes sense in terms of what I'm proposing with the thermodynamics of the system itself. So, but go on with your thought. Sorry.
But what I find hard to understand is how the blast from the sun has strength to move the moon. You see?
Yeah.
Because
I'm not
when you have two bodies. So
yep.
let's say you have. I don't have anything here. I have these close clamps. You have two bodies. If this one is pushed by some sort of external force, because they are connected, they are going to swirl together. I don't see them doing this. They will do eventually if the strength is enough.
So yes, I understand.
But they'll push one another.
So think about it like this. The Earth is spinning, right?
Okay.
But the moon is just coming like this.
Okay.
So if you hit a wave of something spinning, it's not gonna be as affected because it's gonna deflect it off. But something that's slowly moving can be hit a little bit more. And I'm not suggesting that it's a lot. In my initial thesis, I thought that this happened, that the moon came back a lot every cycle, or every fourth or fifth cycle. And what I've concluded is that this is the evolutionary process. And so now what I would propose is that it's affected a little bit. And so, for example, the difference between the distance at its greatest distance and least distance is 28 Earths radii versus 31 Earths radii. And what I would say is that, the depending on whether that is at the elliptical or is happening at the time when there's an eclipse, or whether it's here. Usually the shorter distance is here and the longer distance is that way versus the sun over here.
Right.
But there's precession of the moon's orbit. And so every age, that's going to be a little bit different. And so over the course of the whole cycle, it's rounded out. And so the effect isn't huge, but for example, you know, when you're in the elliptical and you're closer to the planet, this part of the orbit speeds up, and then you go out at a distance and it slows down.
Slows down.
Right. And so in my conception, this is kind of the age of Aquarius in general. And the dynamics of why that is I think more on that next level of Birkeland current of what we're actually circling, because that last video I watched about precession and how it's tied to that makes a lot of sense. And just so I think that over the 1,000-year cycle, which is really the Ice Age cycle, that's four precessional cycles. And so you're getting that clockwork 4 number that's rounding it all out. But go on, ask me. I don't know if that's clarifying anything.
Yes, it is. So if I picture this, you have the moon and the earth, right? If the moon is not exactly perpendicular to the force that's coming, wouldn't that push the two objects out of course? Okay, you see, because they are spinning, so the force will not go straight. The force will go sideways. It will make an ellipse of the circle, that there is already an ellipse. I don't know if you follow what I mean. So
yeah,
that little changes in the orbit of the Earth itself, pushed by the moon, and I'm taking your theory, wouldn't that alone make we wouldn't need any mechanism to give us glacial periods?
So I'm not sure if Ricardo was actually referring to the height of the moon at this point, but I wanted to add it in because it's important to note that it's not just this back and forth towards the sun and away from the sun, but the height of the moon relative to the Earth during this impact is going to be important. And one of the things that I intuitively believe here is that at a certain distance, if you look at the Lorentz equations and relate periodicity of the rotation period of the moon, it's reaching a point where its orbit is going to become more toroidal. And I believe that that's what I believe that's what's affecting the magnetic field.
So here's where it gets a little complicated, I think, because the Earth and Moon actually rotate around their barycenter, not the center of the Earth.
Yes.
And because of that, if the Moon gets closer to the Earth just speeds up. It's like an accordion. So the closer the Earth was, the faster Earth was rotating. And so even if it's just a little bit in its orbit that it gets pushed in a little bit, that's going to make the Earth speed up a little bit. And like I said, I'm not suggesting that it's going to be huge. And normally these kind of effects have a lag time too. You know, like for example, you're supercharging the moon, so it's going to be hotter. Is that going to make it speed up? You know, there's also the question of whether debris gets blown off the moon from this. It's possible, and that would lighten the moon, and that would also affect its orbit. But I think
the path of that debris would be visible, at least at night.
Yeah, I mean, if it
will go in the magnetic connection between the Earth and the moon. Certainly.
Yeah, it would most likely, if it was in a spot where it was getting blown off and it was in front of the sun, you know, between us, then that debris would come at Earth, and that would increase Earth's mass, you know, and that would also change our rotation speed. And it's all very minuscule. And there's also always the possibility that there's much more change due to the energy. Just the energy itself could be causing the expansion of the Earth or whatever. There's a very open question about what causes Earth expansion, if you believe in that.
No, because that mechanism is what comes to mind when I think of that mechanism in action. I see the answer for many of the when you get geology that the geologists don't like this, when there is massive distortions in the earth that you can see in the strata.
Yeah.
That means it wasn't made millimeter by millimeter for billions of years. It was made in an instant.
Right.
So if you have that massive change in the relation between the moon and the earth, and because of they don't rotate how do you put it? They rotate between their center.
The Barry center.
The Barry center. Okay, sorry. Because it's a rotation that is not exactly the same distance always, and they are pushing each other one side to another according to when they are rotating.
Right.
So that expansion from the nucleus would affect the mantle. The mantle will affect the crust, and the crust would react very quickly to that. So it would explain some crustal displacement in a small scale. I'm not saying continents going from one side to another.
Right.
It would produce dramatic effects on some parts of the continental shelves.
Yeah. So my idea is that on one side of the cycle, it's pushed slowly towards the Earth, and on one side of the cycle, it's slowly pushed away. And so we're at the end of the cycle where it's being pushed away, the half of the cycle from Cancer to Pisces and Aquarius. And so, you know, I had that idea, and then I don't know if you've seen Ben talk about the length of day shortening.
Yes, it's getting.
And I was like, oh
faster.
my God.
The rotation is getting faster, yes.
I was like, oh my God, it changed, you know. And
but last year it was the opposite.
Yeah.
Last year you get the record from the longest day, and then it starts speeding up, and they are not even releasing the data anymore. So,
Right. And so, like, if the Earth is speeding up, then by implication, the moon must be coming closer, and that may be because the Earth's magnetic field is weakening. I don't know, you know. And if the moon's motion is related, as I said, to the core and core stability and the magnetic field,
it must be.
Then if the magnetic field collapses, does that mean that the moon is going to drift in? I mean, it seems like a possibility to me that could be the mechanism that allows the moon to drift in, and that happening at a rapid rate would cause massive tsunamis, and it would likely shift the crust, right?
But if the moon is the one creating the magnetic shield of the Earth, mm-hmm. by rotating unequally the core of the planet, shouldn't we be seeing something on the moon different to the magnetic field being collapsing now, to be collapsing now?
The magnetic field on the moon collapsing?
No, on the Earth.
On the Earth.
You don't see changes on the orbit of the moon right now.
Right.
Or at least they are not saying there are. So the magnetic field should be at least equally strong. It could be changing its position only. You see, we could see the same strength but changing position on the globe. But what we are seeing is a diminution. The strength of the field is weakening. So we are more vulnerable to the sun, and if it's weakening, what is the drive behind?
Yeah, it's a chicken and egg thing. Is the moon causing the weakness, or is the Earth? You know, if that's the case, and again, it's all cyclical, tied to larger cycles, and so it appears that, like, our star is. You know that our star, like, goes up and down across the galactic plane.
Galactic plane, yeah.
But it doesn't just go up and down. That's two-dimensional thinking. It's spiraling.
And moving.
And
at
moving.
the same time.
Yeah. And our sun the North Pole of our sun actually faces the galactic plane currently. So
Okay.
if you think about how we're spiraling, and the likelihood is that like we just crossed the galactic plane coming up, I believe, right?
Yes.
So as we move over the galactic plane, we're getting into denser space because we're getting closer to the galactic center. And I don't mean denser space, I just mean like relative to everything else. And I know, like, for example, I looked at the proximity of stars over the next 12,000 years, and the next really close approach is in 4,000 years. Like they go like this, you know, and there's a bunch of them, but the closest one is in like 4,000 years.
That's 2,000 years less than the half cycle.
Right, but it's where if you know about the so like the half cycle that destroyed Atlantis, it was like the last of 3 major cataclysms, and each one of those cataclysms, it goes back about 6,000 more years. So it's like 3 more ages. There was an event at each age kind of demarcation, and that's actually shown in that astrological thing from the 1500s.
Yeah.
And so the Kumari Kudam tradition is out of Southeast Asia, and Graham Hancock talks about this, and they actually discuss the actual specific dates of those other disasters, those other floods, and they basically coincide with all that, going back to basically the beginning of Scorpio, the age of Scorpio. So there's and that part of the cycle is where we have like no North Star, you know.
Yes.
They actually coincide
between Polaris and Vega.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I do think that there is something to that, and so I think that when I it's just that density, because it's a lot of the things that I'm describing are about pressure and density and heat, and how heat is transferred depending on pressure and density. It's basically bubble theory. It's holographic bubble theory. You know, everything is a bubble that kind of has its magnetic field, and if it expands too much this way, then it can break off at the end, and that's where the fractalization happens.
So we must find the mechanism that speeds it up and elongates it with its gravity, its speed, its magnetic internal forces, electrical current. All of these things can have that effect.
Yeah, because like we can't just like think that our sun circles the galactic center. Like that's not the only thing. It's also like the galactic center is here, but there's the stream that we're on, you know, and we're circling along that here too, you know. And then you get to our system and it's circling this way, but you know, and so there's all these different angles where that hard aspect can happen, and that's where fractalization happens, and that's why it happens, I think.
If we think, if I learned something from Harmai, is that 0.000001 is extremely relevant to the result. So we are only going to the galactic center because that's how far our imagination can manage to move. But if we went there, we must go further, because the galactic center will be related to the galactic cluster. The galactic cluster will be related to even a larger cluster, and then we got the magnetars, we got the pulsars, we got that are not like the sun that has only a little bit of energy, but have massive outputs of energy that have to influence the system, and then those massive objects that are not black holes, that science cannot understand what they are still, and emit immense amounts of radiation, and that are not black holes. I can't remember, quasars, is that it?
Yeah,
I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
And then we could still go forward furthest in time because we're looking into the past literally, right? So we go further and further and further and reach the point that the universe should be they say that when it burst, it was very hot, right? But
Right.
what they are finding now is that it is hot, but it's hot in certain points. It's not hot in one point. So like it was burst. So it must be one of the explanations is what you're saying. It when it received the energy, it starts fractalizing and created all these areas. Then can fractalize into perhaps new universes. We don't know.
Yeah, I think that it's still hard for us to see all the patterns, like we're just now seeing the distribution of exoplanets and how that's changing, how we thought about our solar system could form, and the orientation of galaxies to each other, and the cosmic strings, and the Birkeland currents. Like, we still have a very limited view of the larger picture, and how it goes together. But what's beautiful is that right now, like the amount of data coming out is so overwhelming, and every day there's a new discovery that basically pushes our understanding forward. And so that's what I like to kind of like tell people is that, that's why everybody's feeling so crazy and overwhelmed. There's so much information, and so much of it is undermining authorities. Like, they can't keep up with the information. You're talking about something and you're a teacher, but some kid comes along and is like, Google, no, you're wrong. Like, here, no, you're wrong, look, and that's happening so fast, and it's happening to everybody and everything, that nobody can really keep up with it, and it's driving us all insane because we have to deal with so many people. And so that's part of the paradigm shift of Aquarius, is the intellectual comes to the forefront, and the person who can creatively put it together really is the archetype who thrives in that kind of environment. And it's that breakdown of the traditional structure is really hard, and there's no easy answer for us to figure out what comes next. But it's amazing that someone like me, who doesn't have a background in these subjects but has way too much free time and just the drive to understand, can put so many dots together to create a whole new paradigm that could potentially inform our physics for the next 1,000 years. And I'm not the only one doing it. There's other people out there who are rewriting physics too. All the people doing the electric universe and plasma universe, and Ben and Mike McCullough. He's a guy doing this stuff with quantum inertia, which I think is a really interesting concept that could explain a lot of the cosmic background radiation and a lot of other phenomena. And I think it ties in because it relates to event horizons, and that ties in with the Buddha brought and fractalization, for me anyway.